Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road journey. This week I've come to Herefordshire, one of the more rural counties in England, and indeed its largest contribution to society is Hereford cattle or beef and cider, so it's just a bunch of pissed up farmers having a jolly. But maybe today we'll answer the age-old question of what colour is the boathouse at Hereford, because the county is home to the SAS, who no doubt have me lined up in their sights as we speak. Today we'll be exploring some, probably not all, of this potentially uninteresting county in search of something better than cider on a journey that'll take us from On Wye to Hereford. As always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and we begin in On Wye, which apparently is the birthplace of tourism. We'll soon see about that. On Wye, or Ross, is a small town that in the days of my guidebook had around 4,500 residents who didn't really do anything. There doesn't appear to have been any large-scale industry in the town. My guidebook refers to the town as Ross, which is correct for the time. The name On Wye came about in the 1930s when the General Post Office decided to rename the town to avoid confusion with other places in the country that were also called Ross. My guidebook suggests we visit what it calls the Prospect Walk. The Prospect is a public garden and walkway that was opened in 1696 by a philanthropist known as John Kyrrell. He spent most of his days donating to the poor and generally making Ross a much better place by installing things like this garden. Within the Prospect Garden are several trees which I think were planted at the time of the garden's construction. In any case, they were planted to serve as memorials to certain individuals who lived within the town. But the main reason to visit the Prospect Garden is because it provides a wonderful view across Herefordshire, is what I'd like to be saying, but as you can see, the weather is not really working for us right now. Anyway, just over there is the River Wye, and that's where we're heading next. But why the River Wye, I hear you ask? Earlier I said that Ross was the birthplace of tourism, and it was here on the River Wye where it all began way back in 1745. A clergyman known as John Egerton lived in a rectory in Ross, and he would regularly invite his friends or family down for a boat ride on the river. What began as the occasional jolly day out grew into a proper business where, having had a boat specifically made, he charged people for a boat tour navigating the River Wye from On Wye down to Chepstow, and these boat tours are regarded as the first proper organised public tours in the country, which is why On Wye and the River Wye is said to be the birthplace of tourism. Our next destination is the town of Ledbury, and to get there we'll be using the A449. And I've run out of things to tell you about this journey. The road is exactly the same as it was in the old days. There's nothing of interest along the way, and it's just a nice countryside drive, isn't it? So this voiceover is ultimately pointless. Ledbury, a small town that's noted for its Tudor architecture, with Ledbury's Market Hall providing a perfect example. Today, a Grade 1 listed structure, it was built in 1617, with the open ground floor being used as a market space and the space and room above being used for grain storage. It was converted for use as a town hall in the early 1800s, and in more modern times it was used as a meeting place by the local town council. The building had some extensive restoration work carried out in 2005, which interestingly involved raising the entire building 600 millimetres above the support posts so that they could be restored. On the west side of Ledbury, we find a large brewery or factory. Today, they process over 15,000 tonnes of fruit every week to make cider, but the factory began as a producer of jam that was set up in 1916 by local entrepreneur Tom Davies. He saw that there was a surplus of fruit within the local farms, so he set up this factory to take advantage of that surplus fruit and make jam. He did a very good job of it too, ending up with a contract to supply Buckingham Palace. And then he went bankrupt in 1928, so maybe not such a good job after all, but it doesn't matter. The company was bought by someone else and the Ledbury Preserves Company carried on. They profited massively during the Second Small Disagreement of 1939 to 1945, when their jam became part of the military's emergency kit that was issued to every soldier. In later years, the factory became home to the Robertson's brand of preserves, but a few company buyouts later, jam production came to an end in 2008 because production was moved elsewhere, and this marked the end of nearly 100 years of jam making in Ledbury. However, interestingly, some of the original 1916 factory is still in use today. Okay, let's crack on, and we're going to head along the A438 towards Hereford, which is pretty much the same as it was in the old days again, but we're going to turn off the main road at Stoke Edith to go in search of what's left of a road that seems to have been removed. According to our old maps, Purton Lane was a road that went this way, but as you'll see today, that's no longer the case because it's been quarried. As a result, there's a new section of Purton Lane that wasn't a thing until more recently. Purton Quarry had sat abandoned for decades, but when the news broke of a new bypass that was to be built nearby, a company purchased the quarrying rights and reopened it in the hope that they would be awarded the contract to supply the building materials for this road building project. Would you believe it? The road building project was cancelled, but it was a bit late for the quarry, who had already set up shop. However, it doesn't seem to have caused them any issues because the quarry remains open and they're still doing good business. So much so, more material was required, leading them to dig out more of the ground, including the original Purton Lane, which disappeared in around 2017. Hereford. More specifically, an industrial estate in Hereford. Today, not very interesting, but this industrial estate was once an ammunition and shell filling factory that was built in the late 1800s, and it would become quite a busy place as of 1914 for some reason. There are several original factory buildings remaining which are in use today by various organisations. However, I noticed on Google Maps what looks like an original yet abandoned building hiding in the bushes, and I thought we could try and take a closer look. A decision that I am instantly regretting. Well, this is bollocks. I can see the building that we're trying to get to. It's over here somewhere. However, I can't see a clear way through. These brambles are a little bit too much for me. Okay, turning around. Well, that didn't work out, did it? Never mind, let's move on. And we're going to stick with the same industrial estate because there's another piece of interesting history to discuss, and it's car racing. The ammunition factory was mothballed in the 1920s, and this led to a disused section of very straight road, appropriately named the Straight Mile. In 1924, a few local car clubs got together thinking it would be a great idea to set up a race event using this disused near-perfect straight section of road, and surprisingly, they got permission. It was set up as a timed half-mile straight, so in theory all you had to do was drive in a straight line really fast and you'd be fine. But this was the good old days, so yes, the track was straight, but it was absurdly narrow with very thin grass verges on either side, and the road surface was nothing more than the leftovers of an old military site, and for good measure, the entire course would be lined with spectators all the way down. The best part is that the event featured a special speed brake test, which sounds great, but the real reason for introducing this feature was because there wasn't really enough space to stop in time, so you had to slam on the brakes as much as possible. Not too much of a problem in today's modern cars, but you try stopping a 1920s race car from 90 miles an hour. It was better times back then. Interestingly, one of the race competitors was a chap called Henry Morgan, who would go on to start the Morgan Motor Company, who we visited in a previous episode. But what is the colour of the boathouse in Hereford? Well, the SAS don't have one, but here is the boathouse in Hereford, and it's brown, white, bit of blue. These Ronin references doing anything for you? You'll never guess what my guidebook says about Hereford. Noted for cider. Of course, I told you it was just a bunch of pissed up farmers and cider, but as the name suggests, Hereford is the county town of Herefordshire, and it's the largest settlement in the county by quite some margin, although with a population of less than 55,000, it's hardly what I'd call a large metropolis. My guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to visit Castle Green, which is definitely green, but there's no castle. Despite this, it's now a scheduled ancient monument. I don't know either, but if there was a castle, there's a good chance it would have been massive, with early records mentioning it had a similar size and appearance to Windsor Castle. Although looking around, I don't really know where they would have fitted that in, but either way, it's long gone, having been demolished in the late 1600s. In the centre of Castle Green is Nelson's Column, very much like the one in London, although a lot smaller. It was built in 1809, and during its construction, they ran out of money. The plan was to have a nice statue of Nelson on the top, but they couldn't afford to do that, so instead went with the cheaper option of this urn thing. Not that Nelson minded, of course, he was dead. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care, bye bye.